Hello, everybody. I'm here with Eli Harman, the man who's been with Propertarianism for I think nearly 10 years. Not even, feels like it at least.
About eight.
Yeah, 8. It's been quite a while, and you are a legend around the Propertarian sphere. Everybody know you, and especially early on, we all know that you were with Kurt early on more than I don't think anyone else that's active right now, at least in our spheres, has been as active as you have been for that long period of time. So
Yeah, I think there were a couple of other people back then, but I think most of them have drifted away.
so how did you hear about Kurt or Propertarianism for the first time?
So I heard about Kurt through a mutual friend on Facebook, a libertarian friend who was big into critical rationalist epistemology, so falsificationist epistemology. And that was kind of his area of expertise. And I saw Kurt participating in a lot of discussions on those threads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I ran into Kurt for the first time. And he seemed to be having a lot of similar ideas to what I had at the time, although his were a lot more developed. I would say he'd obviously been working on them for a while, even back then.
And what made you decide that you want to help him out or become more active between his like with his ideas? Because usually, when you meet someone who knows more than you, sure you learn, but you usually aren't active for 5 years around. Oh, sorry, 8 years around the person. Like what in your mind made you want to go with him?
Well, I was at that point in time, I guess you could say I was in the libertarian to alt-right pipeline.
Ah,
So my background is from libertarianism and like the kind of like the academic strain of libertarianism, like the Mises Institute type
yeah.
and Friedman type libertarianism. And I was starting to get fed up with like the proliferation of left libertarianism at that time and libertarian feminism and all these kind of things that I felt were kind of like entryist movements that were trying to take over libertarianism. And then also just getting frustrated with libertarianism in general because, people were making a lot of emotional arguments and, kind of entitlement based arguments about, my freedom, my liberty, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and not being really as rigorous and as value neutral, scientific as I would like. Um, and so I was getting fed up with that and kind of moving towards more of a right wing perspective
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. But also, some of the same issues with the right wing because a lot of it was emotionally based or
Yes.
aesthetically based. And so that's why Kurt was so refreshing because it was a more scientific, um, more like systematizing approach, an empirical approach, and kind of gave me a language to talk about a lot of these concepts in a way that I hadn't had before.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, even today, when it comes to the right wing, is they're basing it on emotion more than based on actual facts. And it sounds like Ben Shapiro, I know, but evidence and sort of just pragmatic thought is also what kind of brought me into this. I don't like emotions is something you can jerk off to time to time when you look at the internet, but it's not gonna change the world. It's not actually having an effect. So I'm with you in that school. That's interesting.
Emotions may be useful for us, right? They're useful internally,
Yeah.
especially as a shortcut. If we need to make a snap judgment about something on limited information, emotions are often a good heuristic because those emotional responses, those emotional reactions are evolved to be effective heuristics in many cases, not always. And that's why we have to be careful and sometimes dig a little deeper than that.
Yeah, I agree. So how was this early stage of propertarianism 8 years ago? How was Kurt back then? What were the big things back in the day?
At the time, I probably saw it as kind of like a particularly right-wing offshoot of libertarianism, sort of like in the vein of Hans Hermann Hoppe, but
Yeah,
maybe more right-wing than that.
yeah,
So that was how I probably viewed it initially, and as sort of like a synthesis of two things that I was, kind of familiar with and kind of enthusiastic about, because I still wasn't totally over libertarianism, and I was getting into right wing stuff, but I wanted like a more rigorous and empirical approach to that. Um, and that was before Kurt had started aggressively trying to trigger libertarians. So it was more of like a gentle approach, like, here's the flaw in your approach, and let me help you get past it. And then, not long after I started associating with Kurt online, that was when he started really going after like Rothbardians and ghetto ethics, and really like strongly counter signaling libertarianism in that way. But I mean, it was great because I saw where he was coming from, and the arguments that he was basing it on. So it was one of the things that helped me move past libertarianism.
all right. So these different stages then, I mean, of my little time with prop, I know how much things can change from one year to the other. So would you like, so I guess ghetto ethics came pretty much after you joined. So what will that be? 2013, 2014? How have you seen the changes after that as well? Do you see it as has been many positive changes from when it started, or negative changes from when it started?
Mostly positive changes. It's an evolutionary process, and it's also a collaborative process because Kurt bounces ideas off of other people, and he gets their feedback, and he gets their criticism, and he gets their suggestions, and he incorporates that into new iterations. So I think overall it's been a fairly positive development.
That's good. So, and how are you seeing today? Do you see a lot of the positive changes that were happening for the last 3 months?
Well, obviously the Richmond event introduced some rifts among the propertarian community. So maybe that's not positive per se, but I think some good will still come of it, because it kind of has gotten a lot bigger than Kurt.
Yes.
So there's a lot more people involved. There's a lot more perspectives involved. And, we don't necessarily have to agree about everything. And in fact, Kurt has never claimed that we have to agree about everything, that there are multiple different perspectives that can fit under the propertarian umbrella and can make use of propertarian tools and propertarian arguments to articulate their perspectives, though they may differ.
Yes, because it's not about the ideas you create from it, it's methodology. So we can disagree with each other, which we do, but it doesn't mean that we don't think the methodology is good. So yes. So how, because you were in Richmond, can you tell me a little bit about what happened there and how it felt to be there, I should say, because you were even interviewed by one of the local news media there.
Yeah, it was great being there. It was great energy. Everybody was excited to be there. It was a little bit, we didn't know quite what we were getting into. So there were some butterflies in the stomach, and it didn't take long once we got there the morning of the event for most of that to dissipate. Like, it was like, okay, this is going to go pretty smoothly. It doesn't look like there's much of a chance of things going seriously sideways. And even when it got really tense, like when that other group came up and was yelling at us,
yes,
it was, notwithstanding the fact that everybody was armed, them and us, and all of these other things, it was it didn't seem like it was getting to the point of physical violence. So it wasn't tense in that sense. It was confrontational in the sense that they were yelling hostile ideas at us and we were yelling back. But it didn't seem like it was evolving in a violent direction.
That's good.
And, when the Black Lives Matter guys came up to Kurt after the speech to talk to him, I don't think many people there had any problem with that. Or even like some of the things that were said back and forth, controversial as they were to the internet audience. I think people seeing it in context and just being there and sharing the camaraderie with everybody else, that was a very small part of it for the people who were there. They didn't focus in on that and get upset about that to nearly the extent that the internet audience did. So while I understand kind of the upset there and the unhappiness around that, the people who were there saw it as a very small part of the whole event and the whole experience. And it wasn't something that overshadowed everything else for us. So at first we didn't really understand where the reaction was coming from. And still, I don't think, some people have put forth valid criticisms. And even from within the group, there's been some valid criticism. But I still think a lot of the online criticism has been kind of pretty much out of context and just not really addressing any point that is particularly relevant to anything. It's just kind of, like a vomiting up of emotional nonsense for the most part.
No, I get it.
A lot of noise, very little signal.
Yeah. Many people had an issue, though, not so much with saying that they have bigger dicks or anything like that, but what happened afterwards. How you guys, well, Kurt as well, handled the stress. That was actually the main issue. Not so much.
That's more understandable. That perspective is more understandable. I don't think it was handled in the best way afterwards, and there is going to be some fallout from that. There are some, bridges that have burned as a result of that. So that's unfortunate, but I do understand why that has happened.
Yes, all right. So this approach that you guys did, it was more of what we call the populist approach. John Mark trying to get as many views as possible. You're doing a rally to show the folk that you have some sort of power, I should say, at least some say have. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was the right approach when it comes to moving propertarianism to the real world, this populist approach, or should the first move to the real world been differently, do you think, yourself?
Well, it's done. It can't be undone. So,
of course.
The best question is maybe what's the best approach, going forward.
Yeah.
And populism, it hasn't worked out for propertarianism. There is a populist tendency. There is a developing populist tendency in the world, both in, America and in Europe,
yes,
and also other places. So that is that's a big force in the world right now, and it's probably only going to get bigger.
Yes.
But it may not be the correct vehicle for propertarianism. So I would be sympathetic to arguments of that sort, and probably would even make some of my own.
So what would you then say if you have an idea of what you should do now then? If not populism, what is the way forward? It's a hard question. So I'm not...
I think populism is the correct way forward for the Republican Party.
Huh.
So if they can develop a more populist platform, even like Trump started them in that direction, but if they can take that even further and develop a, let's say a socially conservative but economically populist platform, something that can appeal to the disenfranchised white working class in America that used to vote Democrat, then have a chance at a few more electoral victories. So that's a good strategy for them. For us, I think probably we need to focus more on education and appealing to, the quality people who can actually understand this stuff and apply this stuff, and taking that out to the masses, maybe in some kind of abridged form.
Mm-hmm.
So several layers of abstraction and complexity, right? So having people who can understand it at the highest level and then simplify it and apply it at a lower level for the people below them, and then maybe even a couple levels below that.
Yeah.
So that's probably the way we need to go and focus more on the theory and the education and finding the talented people who can participate in that productively.
So, hypothetical, what do you think is the end goal then for propertarianism? What goal should we reach, or propertarianism reach, until we are like happy?
Well, there are probably as many different end goals as there are propertarians, but the goal of propertarianism as such would probably be to provide a framework for people to discuss their own goals and to negotiate to achieve as many of their goals as possible, even if they're not the same.
All right, so a different plan for both individually and for like different nations, I guess. But as an education, then propertarianism as an education, what state would we be happy in that we can move it to the other people? Because what I know of Kurt, he wants to create this little institute for like education itself, and when he has created that, he's happy, and then it moves forward from that. But what would you say is when you think of the end goal, or not end, but where propertarianism is at its finish line, how it looks like?
So it'd be hard for me to answer that without saying what about propertarianism has been most valuable to me in the past. And the most valuable things I've found in propertarianism are the concept of property in toto, which is, property in all of its forms.
Agreed.
And that property can take more forms than just physical private property or personal property.
Agreed.
That you can have different kinds of common property, you can have different kinds of intangible property, and any combination of that.
Yes.
And it's just what people demonstrate a willingness and ability to defend.
Yes.
So that's an extremely valuable concept to me, and it's helped me a lot in thinking about a lot of different questions. Also, the epistemology, the falsificationist epistemology, that we're not looking for justifications for our hypotheses or theories. We're testing them for falsification and seeing if they survive that testing. And that's an approach that leads to more intellectual humility, I think. And then ultimately, more truth because you don't persist in error to the same extent. You're able to identify and discard errors using that approach that you might cling to if you were using another approach. That's probably been the two most. There are other things I could cite, but as far as what I want to see personally and what would make me happy is I'm very sensitive to trends that I can extrapolate forward to bad places.
Okay.
And if somebody's like, oh, well, don't worry, it's not going to be a problem for centuries. I'm like, yeah, but it's going to be a problem in centuries. And that's not that far. Only a couple of generations, relatively speaking. So, maybe we ought to address this. So that's what would make me happy, is to look around me and not be able to perceive trends that I feel like are going to negatively impact me or my descendants in the near or medium or long-term future.
Yeah, that's honorable. I mean, what is it? What do you want to say? Usually in the 20s, everybody had this positive view of the future. 100 years from now, everybody will be flying their own little jetpacks. But today, if you ask people how 100 years from now is going to look like, it's all disaster. I think everybody today sees the future as not great. And there's multiple reasons for that, of course. But I understand fully what you mean. You kind of want to remove people from this, like, not based on lies, but based on truth that 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, the future is good because changes we have done today. That's honorable. Very long-term thinking.
I think that property in toto is a good way to address that, because you can define a lot of these things that are changing, in negative ways,
Yes.
as somebody's property, and give them an incentive to defend it. And, even if you don't do that, they're going to do it anyway. And you're not going to like it because it's probably going to be pretty chaotic and haphazard, the way that they do that. So, all property rights are codified and enforced in order to prevent conflict ultimately. And so if you don't do that properly or correctly or rigorously enough, the inevitable result is going to be conflict.
Yes. And deadly conflict.
Right. Because it's going to be conflict over stuff that nobody can articulate a right to that anybody can agree on.
Yes. That's bad. Do you, just hypotheses now, do you think there will be an upcoming new world war? Just thought it out of my head now.
I think it's probably more likely than not. I don't see any way around it. Hypothetically, we could avoid it. We could unwind it. We could, simmer down the conflicts that are leading to it, and, try to buy off enough of the interested parties that it doesn't have to occur. But that would take responsible leadership. Yeah. Which is something I'm not seeing a lot of.
No, me neither.
I just think there's too much at stake. There's too many resources, trillions of dollars, whole continents, the future of human civilization itself. These are huge stakes, and nobody's going to give up their claim to those things lightly.
No. Definitely. So I want to talk about a little bit more about today. It's happening now, a little bit later. But I first want to go into, in a way, I usually say your role in propertarianism, or how people view you, is as the radical. You're the man with, smart man, but the man with the more out there ideas. Mm-hmm. Your videos, the ones that get popular, if I'm correct, you popularize the word white Sharia, for example.
Yeah.
Which is so funny, but let's talk a bit more about this. Do you see yourself as the radical, or do you see yourself as just part of the group? No, everybody else?
I am part of the group. I feel like part of the group. I'm a bit radical too. I think Kurt and I have often played a good cop, bad cop kind of role, with me as maybe more of the bad cop than Kurt. So in that sense, I'm radical. I may be a moderate in the sense that there's a lot of people in the right wing, say, who would want me to be a lot more radical. So in that sense, I'm maybe a moderate bridge between them and propertarianism. But certainly for propertarianism, I might be on more of the radical side.
So words like white Sharia, and I know you also had opinions about sexual revolution, female empowerment, and all these. Were they always part of you? Did you always think like this, or was it more for a show or something you thought of recently?
No, I didn't always think like that. I was at one point pretty fully bought into the whole Enlightenment idea, all the, the libertarian stuff about meritocracy at least and equal opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcomes, but equal opportunity and meritocracy and individualism, all of those things I was pretty bought into at one time. And ideas like white Sharia and, like the sexual revolution being a disaster, those come from seeing where that leads and not liking the results. So, like I was just talking with somebody earlier about, I always found, let's say the recent trans phenomenon that has really taken off in the last decade. I always found that a bit weird, but as long as people did it behind closed doors, I didn't have much problem with it. But it's been since it's become so obvious that they're not going to keep it behind closed doors. They're going to cram it down our throats. They're going to go after our bakers. They're going to go after our children.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to have the parades in the streets. They're going to be aggressive and belligerent about it. They're going to be in your face. To me, that's what has made me react against that. And so now, even if somebody is keeping it behind closed doors, I have a disgust response to it that I didn't used to have, because I don't want to give them that foot in the door. I don't want to start down that slippery slope, because I've seen where it leads.
Yeah. I fully understand. I mean, it's just as I talked about the good dudes whenever it comes up. With the LGBT thing, the rallies that they're doing is actually not helping, it's hurting, because it's invoking disgusting people. The point is normalizing not making disgusting. What two dudes do in private is up to two dudes. But because they're doing it publicly and showing it off, your disgust in your head starts showing. And more and more now, disgusts are becoming more prevalent in society. So it will be a negative reaction towards those type of rallies or the rest. So that's why usually right-wingers talk about, when it comes to the LGBT, how much they're pushing it as showing like this is actually quite disgusting. But if they didn't do that, if the, what can I say, the freeing up transgender, if the response would have been, or the outcome would have been that it just would have been part of normal society and never part of anything that's disgusting, then no one would care. But because because what they're doing is becoming disgusting, therefore there's a negative reaction towards it. Yes, that's what you're pointing out.
And far worse than disgusting, actually destructive.
Yes.
Because they're taking something that, okay, maybe in its inception, maybe you start with a couple of people who have, let's say legitimate intersex conditions, some kind of chromosomal thing, which is an abnormality. There doesn't have to be any value judgment associated with that. That's just what it is. It's an abnormality.
Yeah.
And people can be sensitive to that and sympathetic to that, without trying to normalize it.
Yeah.
And then also some people who maybe for psychological reasons are, putting themselves into a similar category. But again, that seems to be how it started. And then from there, the more it was ideologized, I don't know if that's a real word.
I know what you mean.
But, and the more they tried to normalize it, the more people kind of glommed onto those categories, and people whose connection to those categories is more and more dubious, right?
Yeah.
There's maybe no underlying condition there that would put them in any of those categories. You're just expanding those categories through ideological indoctrination.
Yes.
And that's a destructive thing, because it is fundamentally a barren and maladaptive lifestyle. So if you're recruiting people into that ideologically, that's a problem. That's destructive. That's consumptive of, genetic capital. All the investments that people have made in their children, trying to raise them up, and hoping for grandchildren, and then they get ideologically inducted into this cult that guarantees that'll never happen. That's destruction.
Yeah.
It's almost the evolutionary equivalent of murder.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, I mean, as a father, I always got the question. I actually had a question previously. If you only had one son and that son became gay, would that be okay? I said, gay? Okay, because gays you can still do surrogate mothers and the rest. But if he became even more worse than that, which is, he became into the trend, became idealized, and he became into this trend that having children destroys the environment, for example, I would see myself as a failure. Because in today's world, there are people pushing the idea that you shouldn't have children because it destroys the environment. I see that as absolutely destructive. And it's nothing to do with homosexuality, LGBT. That's just complete destruction. There's no reason for that. Because the cost of one child for the environment is bare to none. It's slim. And there are other ways to help the environment.
And it's absolutely dysgenic to boot, because the only people who are going to accept an argument like that or apply an argument like that are precisely the kind of people you would want to be having children. Well, not the only people. There are some people who would buy it that you don't want having children, but by and large, we're talking about like higher IQ people who are going to be buying into it. You know, the selfish and degenerate people, whatever, they can weed themselves out of the gene pool. I don't care about that as much, but just people who are buying into it because, you know, they're the only ones intelligent enough or responsible enough to buy into it and apply it consistently in their life. That's destructive, and it brings about a worse future than the absence of that argument, because all people are not going to stop reproducing. There's still going to be people reproducing. It's just going to be a lower quality of people.
Yeah. But don't you think that a female's instinct is going to trump this ideology? Because a woman is still technically built to have children, and at a certain age, her mind will start to push this idea forward in her brain if she doesn't have a child.
Yes, eventually it will. After a certain number of generations, 3, 4, 5 generations of this, all that will be left will be the people that are, let's say, biologically immune to it. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be for low IQ. They just can't comprehend it or wrap their heads around it, or it could be low impulse control. They just can't apply it. Or it could be just that they have a strong maternal instinct or a maternal drive. And that's maybe, the best case outcome there, selecting for that kind of tendency, because it doesn't have to be exclusive with low IQ or low impulse control. It can be perfectly consistent with that. So all of those things will increase in frequency, and the underlying susceptibility to these kind of doctrines will decline. The problem is what happens in the meantime. As the population contracts, as people call for mass third world immigration to pay for the social insurance schemes, right? What all happens in the meantime while that selection is occurring? And that's where we really run into problems that aren't so easy to solve.
Yeah, but wouldn't, especially in Europe, I don't know, America is different there. But what I'm seeing here, the trend here, while they're in the commons, we're just creating a new underclass. So the immigrants coming in here, they're not getting anything really. They're being put in homes that have to wait 10 years without any work, just rot away. And the people working, they're working for such a low fee, it's pretty much slavery. So, I mean, how I'm seeing things going to happen if this way continues is we're going to have a new a slave class, more or less, doing manual labor for next to no pay by being in shitty conditions, while the higher ups the more white Europeans will then abuse that.
The higher ups meaning like the elites and upper classes, the
The ones
politically well
who
connected.
doesn't breed with the under. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody in the middle just gets stuck paying for it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, I don't see a positive reason for that. When I was over in Europe in 2016, one argument I ran into a couple of times was, oh, well, we need them to pay for our retirement. But I don't understand how net welfare recipients are supposed to pay for your welfare programs. That doesn't make any sense to me. uh, so that argument seems kind of spurious. I think they're going to end up being mainly a drain and a burden to everyone, except for maybe the politically well connected, because they can do like what they've done in America, which is just farm them for votes. That to me seems like the only rational, self-interested reason to have them there, but it's not a particularly sympathetic one.
The elite also found them for cheap labor, as I pointed out. I mean, there's this case in Sweden where the terrorist who drove through the streets in Stockholm, before his job to get money, he worked for the elite, painting houses, like renovating their apartments. And he did that for a very low fee to survive. So he was hanging with higher ups in Swedish society just months before he committed that horrible terroristic act. So many of the new ones who come in, they get abused in this way. I mean, we have done this. We usually do this with the Polish. We've done this before with the Polish, but now we're starting to do it with the refugees that comes in. So, again, my pointing out is that the elite still earns from this. They haven't felt that they're feeling pain for mass immigration because it's kind of away from where they are. The middle class is the ones paying for it. And that's not the future I want to see. Pardon, it's just... This is not supposed to be an interview, but it became an interview. But you said you were in Europe 2016. Have you been in Europe before that, or was it your first time?
I've been in Europe several times. I visited Ukraine in 2014, and also again in 2016. And I visited Germany and Scandinavia in 2016, and also I was in Germany in 2008, and sometimes also a few times before that.
We're in Scandinavia, if I ask.
Norway mostly, and then briefly traveled through Sweden and Denmark by train to reach Germany.
Yeah, I took the train down to Gothenburg, Malmö, Copenhagen, and down. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of the land? What you saw?
Oh, it's beautiful land. I lived in Alaska for a number of years, and so the land in Scandinavia reminded me a lot of that. You know, with the evergreen forests and the mountains and all of that. Just stunning natural beauty, and the people and the culture as well. Very interesting. Very aesthetic. I was pretty disappointed by how many of the newcomers I saw.
Yeah.
And even in really obscure places.
Yeah.
Like just little train stations out in the middle of the Swedish countryside, far from any city. And the platform is crowded with nothing but women in hijabs with their baby strollers.
Yeah, I know. They're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Those baby strollers, man. And they're expensive baby strollers as well. And can I have the cheap ones? Status for those women, weirdly enough. Yeah, I know. They're everywhere. I mean, you were here after 2015. You should have been before. You would see a lot less of it. 2015 was the big move here. We had so many people coming. And what we did before, we put them into segregated areas beforehand because it still came quite a lot, but we could still push them into one area. But 2015, that was a complete impossibility because there were more people came than some of our bigger cities. So you can't push them into one area, so they just They put them everywhere. They spread them out throughout the entire country, leading to the everywhere.
They're doing that in America too, everywhere. And there's particular concentrations of them. Like, for example, the Somalis, a lot of them end up in Minnesota or Maine.
Yeah, the Swedish areas.
Yeah. But even in Alaska, we had Sudanese, we had a few Somalis, not many, but we had Sudanese and, different kinds of African refugees. And they're all given money by the government to settle. But they're told where they're going to go. They're like, you have to go here. And so they've made a conscious effort to like distribute them around the country. Kind of as randomly as possible, but not totally randomly because, they're putting them in wider areas by and large.
Yeah. I mean, it's creating a certain pushback as well, because previously many people here were not used to having these other groups. We were very homogenous. So once they start coming into these areas, well, people start to react, and they don't want them there. So more and more people start voting right wing. It's not enough yet because of how Swedish politics works. You never go past the Social Democrats, because Social Democrats ruled Sweden for 70 years. Every infrastructure in Sweden is built by them. So it's ingrained in people's mind to continue voting for them. But recently they had their lowest points ever. So they're dying now. Thank God. Fucking awful. Well, the Social Democrats worked early on, once we had, the shekels from the Germans, but we don't have that anymore. So we were, like the Social Democrats back in the day were crypto-fascist. We had hard eugenic programs, strong, like every house had to be controlled by the government pretty much. You get grants and things from the government, very homogenous. But they changed completely. Now it's the opposite. So yeah, it's sad. Other places in Europe you visit, Germany, you said Germany, Ukraine. How did you think of those places?
I had a good time in both of them. I mean, Germany has the same issue with newcomers. You walk around, you see them on every street corner, smoking their cigarettes and playing on their phones, which, no doubt the hardworking Germans paid for both of those things. And it just doesn't add anything to the experience, because you're trying to enjoy the culture. You're trying to enjoy the history, the aesthetics, the buildings that are hundreds of years old. And although there's less of that in Germany than there was, a century ago, unfortunately. But trying to enjoy all that stuff. And then you've just got this, Middle Eastern, out of place Middle Eastern and African presence. It's kind of getting in the way. It's not, as a tourist, it doesn't add anything for me to the experience. That's not why I go to Europe. That's not what I want to see in Europe. That's not what I enjoy about Europe.
And how about Ukraine then? How did you see that?
Ukraine had almost none of that. Like, you would see one or two of them here and there, but they looked very out of place. They always looked kind of nervous, like they were looking around, looking over their shoulder. But Ukraine was a beautiful country, beautiful people. They had a lot of that history too. I was in the far west of Ukraine, so it was Galicia. It was formerly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so it had that very Central European flavor to it, and the Central European architecture. And then, of course, if you get a little bit outside the old city centers, you do see the crumbling post-Soviet decay. But as far as the city centers themselves, they were just absolutely gorgeous and very appealing. Great, tons of culture, great cuisine, everything you could really, really want. And with the exchange rate, quite an affordable place to to spend time.
Yeah, I know. But you went to Kiev, right? Then you went to visit Kurt. How was that experience?
Well, I went through Kiev. I didn't spend much time in Kiev. I spent most of my
Mm.
time in Lviv.
Ah,
So, but yeah, I spent time there with Kurt and with an associate of his, Roman,
yep.
who you may or may not know.
Um,
Um, but it was just a great time. It was a very stimulating experience, sitting around on the sidewalk cafes, you know, watching life go by and talking about big questions. I mean, who could want more?
sounds lovely. Yeah, I was in Kiev last year. Yeah, last year. And it was indeed a beautiful city. Very nationalistic. Uh,
Hmm.
the people I went there with was shocked with how much they allowed nationalism to be part of their identity. Because in
Hmm.
Europe, well, rest of Europe, I should say, that type of nationalism is frowned upon.
Yeah, it
So,
was. I was impressed by that, and especially going by the shop windows and seeing the national dress being, um, sold openly and in a lot of different locations, and people seem to take a lot of pride in it. And also, at the cemeteries, people go and they put flowers on the graves, and not only the recent graves of the people who have died in the civil war that they're having there, but also, all of the wars basically. People going back and honoring their ancestors who died in those wars as well. It's very touching,
can you imagine?
that
Yeah,
connection people have to the past.
yeah, it's something we don't have here. So individualistic based. So it's only you yourself, not the past. The past doesn't matter here. Sad.
But it seems like most of Eastern Europe is still like that, and even the parts that are in the European Union, because I know their nationalistic tendencies are exaggerated a lot of the times. But if you look at, let's say their demographics, Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia are still doing fine, or no, not Czechoslovakia, but Czech and Slovakia,
I know what you mean.
still doing fine, relatively speaking, and projected to do fine for quite some time. So they haven't really bought into that blue pill the way Western European countries have.
Any other places in Europe you like to visit?
Yeah, I'd certainly like to visit more of them. I'm most interested in the places where my ancestors come from in particular. So that would mainly be Great Britain, Germany, and also Ireland. I still haven't been to Ireland. I've been to Great Britain and Germany. Um, but those would be the places I'd be most interested in going back. But I'd definitely like to see more of Europe as well. I haven't been to Southern Europe yet, and I've only briefly experienced Eastern Europe. So I'd like to see more of that.
It's a lot to see. But you weren't to Sweden much, so would you ever think of traveling to Scandinavia again to see more?
Yeah, I'm not opposed. Not opposed. I did get off the train and I did some sightseeing in Göteborg and Malmo.
Göteborg. Oh, oh. Well, sorry about Malmö. Yeah, it's
The
a.
parts I visited actually were not too bad. I I was kind of in like a downtown area with little shopping streets and boutiques and churches, and it seemed pretty scenic and European. Um, and then I was like, well, this is kind of disappointing. It doesn't live up to its reputation because even then, Malmo had a pretty rough reputation.
Yeah.
So I walked through some like apartment blocks to see if I could see any more enrichment, so to speak.
Again, it's a
And
very segregated city.
I didn't get mugged or robbed, but
No, of course not.
that weekend, uh, after I had passed through there, like 9 cars were burned.
Yeah. No, thievery, such as pickpocketing and such, is very low in the city. because of the police presence. What is very high is gang criminality, so grenade attacks, explosions, car burnings. I had I'll call it a friend, but I had someone I added on Facebook. I met real quick while out drinking in Malmö, and she's been there for like a few months, and she wrote, "I'm so sick and tired of these explosions. It's every other week a boutique explodes." It's like, yeah, welcome to the city.
Yeah, I've heard about the grenade attacks.
Yeah, quite a lot of it.
So one thing that interests me about Sweden is that my paternal haplogroup, G2A, apparently is quite concentrated around Uppsala in Sweden.
No.
So I don't know if there's any connection there or not. I don't know about any Scandinavian ancestors that I've had. And I've looked into my genealogy pretty extensively. Like, I can trace it back most lines at least a couple hundred years, some further. And I haven't found any connection to Sweden, but Ancestry.com does.
All of Europe has connection to Sweden, my dude. We raped all the way to North Africa.
Ancestry.com does give me a non-negligible percentage of Scandinavian ancestry, both Swedish and Norwegian.
No, but as you should say, the Goths, for example, the ones who took over Spain and Rome, they were Swedish. The Goths. They are from right below Stockholm. We call them West Gothland, East Gothland, and then we have Gotland, which is the island itself. So again, most of Europe has at least seen some Swedish sperm. Joking. And the Swedes also like to brag that we created Russia, our ancestry.
Sounds like you have a lot of colonialism to be guilty about.
No, they're not. They feel proud about it.
Okay. That's interesting.
No, because we never had any colonial. We had some. We had one little place in Africa, and one in the East Indies, I think it's called. Yeah.
There was a Swedish colony in Delaware, also in the eastern North America.
Yeah. But we don't feel. Certain Black Lives Matter activists have tried to blame Sweden for its slavery. It's like, we had like 20-something slaves, my dude. And it's because of one governor in one of these islands in the West Indies. He had a thing for slaves. And he got like gifts, and he kept the slaves himself. So it was one dude, one Swede, that owned all the slaves that we should now feel guilty about. Not at all. Again, I used to say we're not part of this slavery. We had nothing to do with it. So people giving us shit on that is just ridiculous.
I did see that SAS advertisement that came out a few months ago.
All right.
The one where they were saying there's no Scandinavian culture.
Yeah, sus. Yeah.
Yeah, but then they had that one
black fella who said, "I'm the Viking."
Yeah, he said, "We're as bad as our Viking ancestors." I'm like, I don't think you had any Viking ancestors. Don't think so.
While the point of the video was supposed to be sweet, it's like, we're very unique, so come here, it's very unique. It failed completely how they delivered that message. Because saying to Swedes that you don't have a culture is one of the most disgusting things. Because Swedes has one of the most unique, weird cultures ever.
So it didn't go over very well in Sweden either?
No, they hated it. Yes, we have a very unique culture. But they like to say, usually, we don't have culture because we adopt from the French and the Germans. It's like, and just because we adopt things doesn't mean it's ours in the same time. They usually say, in the video it says like, Swedish meatball is Turkish. It's like, yeah, they brought it from Turkey, rolling meat together. But then we made it our own twist after the fact. That's the thing. Same thing with, I should say, Swedes like to dance around a giant penis, which is true. I mean, dance around the penis with two balls on them, and then we dance around it about small frogs, which is technically a French military song that we're singing. So you like to say, oh, you stole it from the French. Yeah, but no Frenchman is dancing around a giant penis. It's the same song. So again, we made it our own twist. Midsummer, that's what it is. It's our twist. Sure, it has inspirations from elsewhere, but it's ours. But they don't like to say that, because as the video even said, it's like, oh, it took the inspiration from that place, from that place, from that place. Therefore, you're not unique. Yeah, but they took that inspiration from that place and that place and that place. Who's the original source? So only the original source has a culture? What's the original source? Greeks? Only Socrates has culture? No one else?
Emmanuel Macron was saying the same thing about France a few years ago. He's saying France has no culture.
Silly. But Macron is not liked, so.
What they're doing with those arguments is they're trying to reduce people's willingness to defend what they have. Because they have designs on it. You know, they have unseemly ambitions towards people's commons and people's common property. You know, they want to take it and destroy it, or use it or misuse it.
Or change it.
And so that's why they push these narratives about European countries not having culture.
Yes. I mean, in Sweden, there was a video even saying that we're getting a new Riksvenska, as we call it. It's the Kingdom Swedish. It's not about translation for it. We're getting new because so many immigrants. So the Swedish was changing. Everybody fucking hated that. It's like, ooh. And there was also another video saying about the new Swedes, that the old Swedes should adapt to the new Swedes. Also, that's also a big fuck you. So, you know, I shouldn't go to France saying to the Frenchmen, become Swedish. I should, if I want to live there, adapt more to them. It's okay if I personally in my little family want to keep dancing around a giant penis, that's fine. But I can't force the Frenchmen to dance around the penis if they don't want to. But that's what our governments are doing.
Did you see that movie Midsummer?
No, I haven't actually seen it.
Neither have I. I've just seen the previews.
Yeah, I mean...
But I love how it's couched as a horror movie. But it's like, oh, well, I would probably see that as pretty idyllic.
No, it's something to do with murder. They're murdering some other people.
Well, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. It all depends on the particulars.
Oof. Again, I haven't seen the movie, but the trailers look sweet. Like, early on, it looks sweet. And again, anything to do with Swedish culture outside of Sweden is always sweet. Because we're always seen as this, like, more, you know, Uggebrugger people. Everybody's trying to pronounce smörgåstårta. You say smörgåstårta. It's like awful. It's like, that's cute. It's cute. Yeah, and we have a very unique culture. But they don't like to say it. And I had a Swede talking about the southern culture here. Like in the south, where I'm from, we hate people from Stockholm. We usually don't like the rest of the people because we're more Danish. And his response was, that's a very Swedish culture thing to do, to hate the Swedes. Like, the South has created such a unique identity of hating the Swedes but still being Swedish that it's part of your culture.
I think hating the big city wherever you are is pretty universal.
Yeah, but especially in the South here, we have absolute hate for them, more than most, because we feel most of the political change is happening. So people from Stockholm make a political change, it affects us the worst, especially during the refugee crisis, because they add, that's far away, so just put them there and then we don't have to care. Yeah, we care. That's what... One thing
that's interesting to me about the Nordic countries is, except for a few areas, they don't look like old countries. You know, you can go in Stockholm and you can see, you know, the old city center or whatever, but outside of that, they don't look like old countries. They look like pretty new construction, modern, um, newish homes, newish office buildings, newish shopping centers. It's almost American in that sense.
Yeah, it has its reasons for that. Location is old. Location can be 1,000 years, 2,000 years old.
Hmm.
But buildings aren't. We weren't very modern. We had an industrial revolution together with the Germans and the British, but we didn't utilize it for the people that well, and we didn't build much. And a lot of the buildings you see today, it's created in 1910s around there, with the new our view of folkhemmet, Swedish home, oh the people's home. That was what created our modern day infrastructure, like buildings and the rest. Even before that, Sweden was not that modern. We're more, I don't know what to call it. We were a lot less, we were not as forward as the Germans were during the time. I should say Stockholm and the cities were, especially places you can trade, but not so much inland. As they usually say, I think it's in the very late 1800s, they usually say, yeah, you can buy children. You can buy children for your cents. Because they pop up so many kids, they just push them out because they don't have food for them. So, buying children was very common. Quite late into the modern era. So.
And also, I think the population used to be a lot smaller, so there just wouldn't have been enough buildings to
1700s.
maintain that without building a lot more.
1700s when Swedes moved out, because we had famines, we had the rest. About 1 million Swedes, 1/3 of our population, left for America. Which was actually not too bad, because then we had more food, we could actually expand a lot more. So it wasn't too bad. And from that we have expanded. And I mean, today they usually say it's 15 million people with Swedish ancestry in the world. So about little less than 10 million in Sweden, surrounding countries, and then America has like 2 or 3 million. So we're quite a lot. But we bred like crazy back in the day. We still breed, actually, quite more than most. In Sweden, it's very common that men and women has education. They are like in their 30s when they have children, but they usually have around 3 kids. So our replacement rate, while it's still below replacement level, is 1.7, because we have a tendency of having more kids, which is good, but still not enough. And blame that on the lower classes, which doesn't have kids.
Well, that's what you want, right? You want the lower classes to not have, and the middle and upper class to have kids.
And that's what's happening now. They're actually having kids. Again, because I'm guessing there's always an economic sense to having kids here, because you get money the more kids you have. Sadly, it works. It's a bit double-edged sword, because a lot of underclass foreign people have a shit ton of kids, and they use that money to pay rent, and then they throw the kids out on the street pretty much to do whatever he wants. Then he comes home at night, eats, and then go to bed. Especially villages are very used to them. But there's some incentive for Swedes to have kids. But sadly, I'm feeling less and less people want kids now, because having kids means you have to invest in the commons. And Sweden is giving the middle finger to that. So.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, we'll blame the government. People are doing their due. But the government is so corrupt, so.
How is Propertarianism doing in Europe? Or what is Propertarianism doing in Europe? Is it doing anything different than it is over here?
I mean, my approach, I have the role as leader. No, but my approach is to talk to politicians, talk to people in power, as we did in Germany recently. Talk to people with higher position, tell them about our ideas, and especially, I mean, personally, I prefer to teach them ownership in toto, because it's something that I think will resonate with a lot of people. So teach them that concept and try to implement it in countries as possible, or at least try to get the conversation going in higher up circles. Because I don't see a point of talking to failures in life, pardon, which suck at getting women or suck at, doesn't have a job and not gonna have children, to teach them about propertarianism. I don't see a point with that. The only point with that would be to get money, and I don't like that. I don't like to abuse them. I'd rather be honest with them and say, do something else, or I'm not focusing on you. If you want to learn what I'm doing, you can still learn it because it's still out there, but I'm not going to focus on you. And sure, I can just take your money, but I'm never going to ask you, because I don't want to abuse you. I'd rather you use that money for your own good to try to improve yourself than giving it to me, because I don't want it. And then I want to try to get the elite more, the people in power again, to understand what the hell we're talking about. And I think it's going to be hard in the West, but at least when it comes to Eastern European countries, or more, with their more right wing already, I think it could be a possibility to teach them those type of ideas. I do think the more we grow here in Europe, the more people's going to listen. We could get an entire party, in some sense, to listen to our ideas and maybe implement one or two of them. And that will create a positive change. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm never an idealistic person who believes that they're going to follow every concept that we're teaching. Of course not. But at least they follow this, like one concept like ownership in total, changing property laws around, I think will help a lot. Create one positive change. And if that's what I can create, one positive change into, how you see 100 years in the future, that it's positive, I think I've done my job. Then it's up to somebody else to do the other things. But at least as long as I create one positive change for humanity, which has a long-term effect, I'm happy. So there is my happiness, I guess. That's what I want. And again, my approach is to get to politicians, elite, or upper middle class even. Actually, people who are successful in life, they're not worth talking to. But I don't see a point talking to somebody who wouldn't succeed with anything in life and only wants propertarianism as a way to feel happy about their life. Because many people in the right, I wouldn't say right, internet sphere right now, they see a dissident political idea, they go to it, they try to create value with their own life to it, and they destroy it. I don't want that. I want to create these positive changes. I didn't come into propertarianism for that reason. For finding happiness. I had that already. But I saw it as a new good political idea worth pushing into the real life, worth pushing into already the political discourse of today, because it's worthwhile. So I just want to avoid those little those bastards like to destroy it.
So you want propertarianism to remain somewhat exclusive?
Yeah, in a way, but everybody can learn about it. But it's something you're gonna talk about. I mean, when it comes to Rothbard, let's be honest. Who the fuck knows about Rothbard outside of people who are learned? You go to a man in the street, he doesn't know what Rothbard is. But tell me, how much have actually Rothbard influenced the world? Tons, absolutely tons. There's still the common man didn't hear about him. So why should I then talk to the common man about these type of ideas? He's not going to understand it anyways. He's going to create his own little warped version of it in his mind. So it's better do like the intellectual class does. Do like Nick Land or Murdoch. What's his name? God, I forgot his name. The NRX people do. influence the elite because it actually has effect. There is a trickle-down effect when it comes to ideas, because people like to mimic the people who are smarter than them. And if the people who are smarter than them have our ideas and like them, it will trickle down anyways. But nothing ever trickles up, because no one who's smarter listens to the man who's dumber. Pardon. Again, I'm being very rude here, but so I do pardon whomever listens to this and feel hit. I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying I had to change. And I mean, if the man listening to this, he shouldn't feel hit. I mean, he's listening to something very exclusive, and if he understands this, that means he's not an idiot at least. So good for you. I mean, I'm an idiot, so don't worry.
I think we all can be in our own ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, God, yeah. I'm good at organizing, good at creating things, changing things, but I'm an absolute idiot.
I like that. I like that approach, though. That might be something I copy and do more of here, because there is a large extent to which we can have an influence, particularly on local politics. And the smaller the jurisdiction, the smaller the population, the closer you are to the leaders, and the more influence you can have over them.
Exactly. And I mean, again, as I said in the Good Dudes, as you as a person, obviously should focus on your local area. And yeah, get a group together. But I mean, you shouldn't focus on the dum-dums in your local area either. Try to get to the people with power, even in your local area. Or become a person of power in your local area, depending how big your region is. I mean, the issue with, if you're born into an area with low population, the issue is there's this personal connection with the people. It can be too personal. So, I mean, in my village, I wouldn't do this because it's too much history. It feels very personal. So that I understand if you don't do. But if you don't have this, like, the weird feelings in you, go for it. Become sort of a local person who knows what the hell he's talking about. Influence the people who are smart in your area, because there is. And I mean, every local area has their people who do political activism. So try to influence them, and make sure, and try to influence them so the wrong side doesn't influence them and destroy your community. Because they're always parasites, and you gotta watch out for those. You gotta learn how to see a parasite and to remove it. You do that by outsmarting them.
Parasites love to spread.
Yeah, they do. God, they fucking do. I dealt with a lot in my life.
They spread deliberately, and they spread, as a natural consequence of the failure that they're always fleeing.
Yeah. And the people in your local area will thank you once you remove this fucking parasite. But anyways, yeah, that's what you can do. But obviously, my approach is the elite one, because I have my momentum going here, so it's working so far. And again, I'm good at it, so it's gonna keep going. See where it leads. I don't know where it leads. It's already led to quite a lot of, again, invitation by the German government. It's not a small feat. So let's hope that I get more invitations from other governments. And maybe...
No, that's a major accomplishment.
Yeah. And I hope it doesn't end there. Again, I gotta keep the momentum going. But I have a few other plans for the future. But I don't like to talk about them before they happen, so...
How do you see the future of Europe evolving in, let's say, the medium term and then also the long term?
It's very gray for the moment. It's very gray.
It's kind of up in the air. Like it could go.
Yes, it can go
different
any
ways.
direction. Like the issue is, we are very blinded by the populism of the right for the moment. We see that very visible, which is good. You have, Netherlands have builders and the rest. The issue with these people are, as I've noticed, and I've talked to my fair amount of right-wingers, they don't have an infrastructure. They are charismatic people in the right, but once you, take Wilders in the Netherlands. If you remove Wilders, what do you have? You have nothing. And the issue as well, because the moderates are dying out and they're coming to the radical. The left wing is also increasing in Europe, but they're increasing not because of personal character, but they have infrastructure. So we have to be careful, because once the right wing is gone, because of the people have left, the charismatic people, we're stuck with a very powerful left in Europe. And I'm worried what's going to happen to them. Because again, we have right-wingers now, but it's not sticking. It's not sticking. It has to stick. You have to build things. And it's up to, this is also talking to these charismatic people. It's good that you're charismatic and all, but for fuck's sake, stop the sectarianist bullshit and build infrastructure. Because once you're gone, you fucked your country. Because people are going to get tired of right-wingers, because it's a trend thing as well. Don't be a trend that just disappears, be a trend that sticks. And I'm not seeing that. That's scaring me. So what I'm hoping now is the more newer people sees this mistake and try to build up something that lasts for a long time.
Seems like we have a similar situation here, because we have Trump. He's a breath of fresh air in some ways. I wouldn't take that away from him. He's also a huge disappointment in some other ways, but he's kind of a one-off. Like, he's an anomaly.
Yeah.
He's I don't see a successor for him waiting in the wings.
No.
So the question is, what comes next? And there doesn't seem to be a clear answer to that.
No. There ain't. And the issue is, if we use up, the right wing uses up the momentum, like Trump momentum, the worst part is after Trump, it's probably not going to keep going that way. It's going to go far that way. So, AOC and the rest, they could build up during Trump era, which is really bad. But that means that there is a discontent on the other side. And people, once this side fail, they're going to go to the other side. And I do think the other side is more successful. So, again, question is what's going to happen.
They certainly have more infrastructure, as you put it.
Yes. They have more people, they have more local gatherings, more supporters. That's not based around just one person. And we usually say the Democratic Party right now is only running an infrastructure. It's running on what they have built up. Because Joe Biden is a nobody. Like, he's an idiot. With brain issues. But it doesn't matter who would be up there. It could have been a literal man with Alzheimer's, not knowing where he is. They still would have gotten the same amount of votes. Because it's not about Joe Biden. It's about the democratic infrastructure, or the infrastructure of the Democratic Party. And that's what they're running on. But the Republicans doesn't have that same. If it wasn't for Trump, the Democrats would have won. They would have won 2016, and they would have won now in the landslide. And that's even after destroying half the fucking country and burning it down, by the way. Public executions on the street. That's even after fucking public executions on the street. That's absolutely fucking nuts. And still they're building it. I'm amazed looking at it. How Democrats could support public executions and still win as the humane party. I am amazed by it. It's amazing to watch. It's just, we're in a clown world, my dude. It's absolutely nuts.
The power of narrative and the power of propaganda is
it's nuts.
something to behold.
Definitely. With that, I just want to say, fuck democracy.
I'll drink to that.
It's cola, but
Now, do you have any connection to the, let's say, the African Propertarian fan club?
African propertarian fan. Do you mean
This is something that Kurt has mentioned a few times. He says he has all these followers in Africa or whatever, and that's part of why he doesn't say certain
so you
things.
mean, I know we have a lot of Egyptians.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know about those guys. They're cool. They write like Arabic stuff. I have no issue with them. And again, it's more Western, yeah, but it could be put into more Middle Eastern as well. I don't think the East wants anything to do with us, but the Middle East has kind of a lot of influences, like at one another. So I can understand that they want prop, but I don't know how they're gonna handle it if it becomes a real political movement.
It seems like most of those guys start out getting into libertarianism.
Yeah, like most.
And then move more into propertarianism. I don't know how libertarianism even gets a foothold in those kind of places.
Egypt is again very Western. Was very Western.
It seems to me like something that would be fairly particular to, well, America especially, but the West more generally.
No, but during the period of early 19, like before World War II, it was, after World War II, directly after World War II, there were many forces in the West pushing for Westernization. The issue was, while they were good at it, sure, Western in some way, they were also blind to the parasites in the country. I mean, the issue with the Iranian Revolution is they forgot about the underclass. The highly religious people. You saw the communists as a direct threat and missed the other ones. So it's a lot of threats in these areas. That's why it's lenient towards dictatorships, to avoid these threats. It's not Western enough. But the issue with America is, oh, you're not Western enough. Okay, bomb. God damn it. You're not doing it. You're not doing the world a favor bombing these places.
No, absolutely not. You won't get any argument from me there.
And Europe in particular, we're dumb enough to fucking take in the people that you're bombing. The fuck is wrong with us?
It's it seems like it takes two different kinds of stupid to make that problem happen.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it also has a lot to do with our high trust. I mean, there are many reasons why we're doing this. There's also high trust. Now, we're so used to high trust societies, Back in the day in Sweden, you didn't lock your door. You didn't lock your car. No one would steal from you. And this high trust kind of continued even after the fact, even once people start stealing again. High trust was still there. So with these new people, same high trust was built up. But the issue is, they're not high trust themselves. They don't care about you. And it's not until very recently Swedes have lowered their trust. There's still high trust among Swedes. If Swedes see each other, they trust them without any issues. But if a Swede sees a non-Swede, And the issue with this as well is we had, since the 60s, we opened our borders. So people who were here from the 60s but are brown, they're treated the same as an immigrant now. Low trust. So the people who were in here before, who actually wanted to help us build up this society of ours, they're being penalized by the new people coming in. Because we're taking them all at the same. Like, if you're brown or if you look Middle Eastern, we're not going to trust you anymore. The high trust is disappearing more and more. So we only start trusting ourselves, other Swedes.
There's an analogy there to something which happened in America. Because even before the end of slavery, when a small number of blacks were earning their freedom in different ways, usually by buying it from their owners.
Yeah.
a lot of these were moving north. They were settling in northern cities. And, initially there was prejudice against them. There was discrimination. There was exclusion. Over a period of, a generation or two, they were able to integrate into those cities pretty successfully. And they were able to earn status and obtain kind of like an equal economic footing and social status with, the traditionally white inhabitants of those northern cities. And also after the end of slavery, when a few more started to follow them. It wasn't until about World War I when large numbers of Southern blacks were brought to the northern cities to work in the factories during the war. That's when they started to create the ghettos and bring in all the social ills and the underclass, all the underclass dynamics, right? The poverty and the crime and everything else. And that just destroyed it for the ones who had already settled there and established themselves and integrated into those cities. And it seems like that's a pattern that keeps repeating internally here in America. Mm-hmm. It's happened several more times after that, or at least once more, where you have people move out of the ghetto and they get established in like a middle-class neighborhood. And, then Obama comes along and provides Section 8 subsidies for the rest of the ghetto to follow. So it's something that keeps recurring.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's why when it comes to anti-immigrant sentiment, it's a lot of immigrants who pushes that because they hate the newer ones. I was in East London Mosque. I studied religion and visited a mosque in England. The imam there he's a based dude. He came there. He's a third generation Brit now, but he's from Pakistan. He says, I was invited here by the Queen herself. His grandparents were, he likes to say. And the reason why he says that is he came here as a royal invitation after the war to help build up England, and they did. And then he, is pretty much culturally English by now, but just with a Pakistani background. And the reason why he says that as well is because the people coming in now, which is flocking to his mosque, is creating so much trouble for him. They don't care. And it's, the mosque that he's in, we were there when they had their prayers on Friday. It was packed. People had to be outside of the praying hall because there were so many people there. And he hates it. Don't think wrong, he obviously loves Muslims in the West, but he hates it so many there because there's so many new ones. They're not part of their community, they're not helping in, they're just coming there to pray because you gotta pray. And they weren't invited, they just pushed themselves there. And the Brits aren't pushing back, they're not pushing them away. So he hates them because he's being punished. Even though he was royally invited by the Queen, he likes to say, for the people coming in now who has no invitation.
On the other hand, though, it's often the second and third generation migrants that are the most trouble. That's one of the things people are saying when you bring up the migrant crisis in Europe. They're like, oh, it's not the refugees who are running people over with trucks. It's second and third generation immigrants. And it's like, oh, so that's supposed to make us feel better about it?
No. Yeah, the second generation, they have an identity problem. So they've created a new identity here in Europe.
There was a terrorist cell that was arrested in my hometown about a decade ago.
Okay.
And I actually knew two of the members of that cell. One of them was a coworker of mine, and one of them went to my boxing gym. And I think one of them, the one who went to my boxing gym, he was an immigrant from Jordan. And the other one, who was my coworker, he was second generation. I think his parents were immigrants from Egypt. And I think part of the problem with this is that the parents may be able to successfully integrate, especially if they came in before
The big
there
wave.
was this idea of mass immigration
Yeah.
and open to all kind of thing, or like a refugee, helping out refugees, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If they came in before that, they may have been pretty successful, pretty educated, able to integrate. They may have been self-selected for compatibility with Western values, say.
Yeah.
Um, but then there may be a regression to the mean if their children can't live up to that, because these people may have been outliers for their society. But if their children can't necessarily live up to that example that they set, then they just feel alienated. They feel like, left out, or, this society of ours doesn't value them or something like that.
Yeah.
If they can't measure up to the standards that their parents did. And so that might push them back into like an ancestral religion as a source of status and identity.
I personally always saw this identity. Like I grew up in lower middle class, around these people. For them, it was Yugoslavs, and it was people in Iraq. Usually, who were these people? And the issue is they couldn't feel the identity of their mother country because they're surrounded by every other type of group, but not their own. And the only time they get their own is in their family. It's kind of weird. In leaving the family, you're ostracized for, like, your culture that you kind of want, which is your mother's culture. It's not there, so you feel weird, and you're not Swedish. You will never be Swedish. Sorry, but you're always gonna be weird for some weird reason, in the skin color or the way you speak. Just some manage to integrate. I'm not saying all, but many of these people, especially if you're more poor, you're gonna have issues. So what you do then, you create a new identity, which is the in between. I'm not gonna use the word because it's not a good word in Sweden. But you become this in between identity, a new identity with the group like the group of people that you're growing up with, and because it's usually young boys, it's many young boys. Their new identity has to do something, and that something is usually crime. It's pickpocketing, it's rat culture, it's gangs, sadly. And the second issue is also the religious issue, especially when it comes to young Muslims. If you don't live near the big mosque, and even living near the big mosques is a concern for other reasons, you're going to have a religious identity issue. So, and who do you go to? What imam do you go to when you have a question about your religious identity or what to believe in? And sadly in Sweden we have a lot of what we call basement mosques. This is usually a radical imam who teaches these boys very horrible things. Doesn't have to be from the Quran itself. It can just be, women a horse, treat women as property, etc. All these type of more awful things. Swedish women are for fucking, for example. And the issue is again, then we go to the big mosque. The issue with the big mosque is there's a Wahhabist element to it, especially in Sweden. While the imams themselves has been vetted by the Swedish government to not be Wahhabi, there is still a lot of Wahhabi influence. So outside of the big mosque in Malmö, there usually is boys or young men with pamphlets telling them how to think differently, meaning the Wahhabi religion. And many young girls get influenced by this, in Malmö in particular, because you come out from the mosque, this young boy says, if you're wearing a loose hijab, the boy can say, don't look like a whore, wear proper. And once you can get over it, But if you hear this every time you come to the mosque, you look like a whore, you look like a whore, you look like a whore. More and more you go into more Wahhabist elements to it, and you start covering yourself up more. You view Swedes lesser, for example, because they also tell you if you have a Swedish girlfriend, you're X, Y, and Z. And this happens a lot. Even in England, was in Aga Khan University, and I spoke to the people there. They're all Pakistanis, and I asked them, all right, so what if one of your girls dates an Englishman? How would you react? Their reaction is, what a whore. The funny thing is, I asked her, what if a boy flirts or dates an English woman? Same thing. They're so ingrained in their own, and they view everyone outside of this as either toys to fuck or not to interact with. So again, the established has their problems, but the basement mosque has their own. So all of this pushes this issue with these young boys in particular to create their own culture and create their own communities, which is not good. So there's a lot of problems. Integration doesn't work because Swedes don't want to take the core issues. They don't want to talk about these mosques. They just trust the imams, they just trust the fucking infrastructure. Say, oh, that's fine. And that's it. And they have no fucking clue what they're doing. And my professor, he was my professor, he moved now, in Islamic studies, he usually gets stupid fucking calls from teachers around Sweden saying the dumbest fucking things about Islam. It was one Somali father that called saying, oh, well, the teacher about the Somali father. The Somali father says, my daughter is not allowed to ice skate because it's against the Quran to ice skate. What the fuck? No, of course it ain't. But these ideas are not being pushed against here. And the more that comes in, the more radical views of Islam is bringing up. And I usually say that many of these... oh, hello camera, you fell.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Many of these ghettos in Sweden, they have a more radical view of Islam than most of the Middle East has. And there was my heated speech.
And there's a tendency within a lot of religions, not just Islam, to radicalize over time.
Yeah.
Because it is predominantly the more radical elements that have the most offspring.
Yeah.
And that's a big, there's a famous speech by Gamal Abdul Nasser, I think,
Yeah.
in Egypt,
Yeah.
where he's making fun of the Muslim Brotherhood for insisting that he require women to wear the hijab.
Yeah, I know the speech.
And, they're all laughing about it and having a good time. Well, when that video was made, there were 20 million people in Egypt.
Yep.
And now there are 100 million people in Egypt. And most of the 80 million increase has come from the Islamic Brotherhood.
Yep.
So you can't joke about that anymore.
Nope.
In
That's
Egypt,
very true. That's very true.
if you know what's good for you. And it's the same thing in America with, our religious sects are not as, radical, not as violent.
There's usually this joke, that the Mormons and the Amish are going to take over America because they're breeding like rabbits.
Right. There's a positive correlation between religiosity and fertility.
Yeah. More conservative religiosity, I would say.
Yes. And I imagine that holds in Europe, although it's probably not as pronounced. Yeah.
No, it holds up very well here. It's very visible. And we don't talk about it. I mean, most people don't talk about it because they don't know it. They don't understand it. The issue with Islam in particular, it's coming from Islam. I'm not talking ill of Islam here. I'm just talking about what's happening. But the issue is many Swedes, even if I talk this very broad terms about it because I know about it, I studied it. I studied in university. I have pretty much a degree in it, so I'm not talking out of my ass. Even if I speak from authority, they still don't like to talk about it because, you're anti-Islam. It's like, no, it's just how it is. And I've had many conversations about people like talking about ISIS, for example. It's like, oh, that's not Islam. It's like, yes, it is. It just is. The people don't like. I don't know why they have this. They don't want to talk about it much, but I think it's just because it's so foreign. They don't understand it. Because we never open up a dialogue about it. There should be more dialogues, and very important, the dialogues that are happening are from radical Wahhabist groups funded by the Saudis. The amount of Saudi money turning into Europe is incredible. That should be banned outright.
America too. They're the biggest foreign lobby group besides Israel.
Yeah, that's really bad.
Yeah, it's kind of concerning if, I imagine one reason it doesn't get addressed is because people of a secular turn of mind, they probably don't like to confront the fact that that is a maladaptive mindset. That's a maladaptive worldview that, by and large, simply cannot compete with what seem like more backwards and superstitious ones. So it's kind of uncomfortable to confront the reality that, let's say, being right in a narrow sense may not be enough. That these traditional faiths that might be wrong in the way that they're wrong about being right in the way that they claim to be right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're more right about more things than the people who can see that discrepancy and make a big deal out of it. And it's going to be very hard to get them to confront that reality that they're actually more wrong about more things than these people that they're wrapped up in thinking are wrong about, some very specific things, which they consider to be of great consequence.
Yeah.
I think the only way to get ahead of it, in a way, is to be, just as strident or intolerant, or maybe even more strident or more intolerant in the relevant ways than, let's say the Muslims are. And that's part of what the white Sharia meme is about.
All right.
That the only way to get ahead of this is to be even more that way, in a certain way. Maybe a way that's more agreeable to us. Otherwise, we get their version.
Oof. I mean, I don't have an answer. It's interesting, but I don't know. I'm too Swedish, I should say that. I don't like to be confrontational. No, but
Well, if you just look at it empirically, Boko Haram is absolutely correct. Do you know what?
That's a quote.
Do you know what Boko Haram means?
No.
Boko means education, specifically Western education, and haram means forbidden.
Yeah.
And so they have made the empirical observation that women who receive a Western education do not have children. And they're like, well, that's no good. So that's forbidden. And they're absolutely right. That correlation exists. There is a causal relationship there. And they've identified it as being incompatible with their culture and their group. And they retaliate against it. And they seek to deny that opportunity not only to their women, but I guess to others.
Yeah, they force themselves onto others.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
So, I mean, you can dislike it all you want, but they're not wrong.
Again, I mean, for the Swedes, it's fine. We're fine with women getting education. They still birth babies, but it all depends on how far through the development the woman is as well, like the women's culture in your region is.
There might be some ways to make it less objectionable. If women didn't focus on education and career until after having children, that might be a better way to do it. Because they have a limited window biologically.
Yeah.
To have the children, or at least to have, the best luck having children and the best children.
Yeah.
So if that were the priority, and then maybe, once the children are a little older and can take care of themselves more, they go get a degree, get a job, whatever, that wouldn't be objectionable. Certainly not as objectionable.
No, it wouldn't.
Because you're still keeping your priorities in the right order. But the way we do it, which is, having women focus their best childbearing years primarily on education and career until they're going, stir crazy, saying I have to settle down and it's almost too late. That's not a good situation for anybody.
No. God. I kind of want to put you into like a room with the feminists and see how you guys clash with each other. I actually wanted to do that. I did a podcast about a year ago with a feminist, and we wanted you on at one point, but she turned crazy, so we couldn't get you on. But I kind of wanted to see that clash. I don't want to say anything because I don't have an opinion, and just saying anything in that situation is just gonna make me look bad. So I'm not saying anything. But I do, I do. You're an interesting fella.
I don't care about.
Oh no, I mean you're not fully wrong. You're not fully wrong either. I know that, but it's about like what. It's also about the class issue, in the sense that if a woman can get an education, move up before getting a baby, it's better for the baby, isn't it? Economic wise.
That used to be one reason women went to university, was to find a better husband.
Yeah.
But the problem is now the indoctrination is, well, you don't need a husband. You should be getting a career so that you can support yourself.
Yeah, fair enough on that one.
And so a lot of this starts out in a fairly benign way, but then it evolves into something much more malignant.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. God. The worst part is, because I'm a man in my youth, I have to play part of this game as well with baby making and the rest. So while we're speaking hypothetical, theory more or less, how the world is, you're still part of that world. So, I have a question in the future: who am I going to marry and have babies with? Am I going to marry a 30-year-old woman with a career, or an 18-year-old girl who doesn't have a career? Like, what's the best choice for me? I don't know.
Well, if you have the choice, that's obvious.
The 18-year-old, you think?
If you have that choice, yeah.
Yeah. But you don't have children, do you?
I don't know.
You want to have kids?
Yeah, I'd like to have kids. I don't have children yet, I should say.
Okay.
It's definitely a goal.
Pardon me, but I actually don't know how old you are, if I may ask.
I'm 36.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, you don't think male have a limit to at what age they can have children? So you can be in your 40s and still have kids?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a limit, for sure. So it's better to start earlier if you can. It's not as hard of a limit for males as it is for females.
Yeah. Also because women find, older men more attractive. The paradox with boys, when they're like around 18. They want someone who is 18 years old. But women want someone who's 25.
Right.
So it's a weird paradox. And then when men are 25, they get the 18-year-olds. So it's the vicious cycle of cucking. Joking, but obviously it's because they want babies.
That actually leads to an interesting dynamic.
Oh.
Because if you have a shrinking population, a demographically contracting population, then what that does is it produces, in effect, a relative shortage of females. Because the females are going to be looking for a mate from their age group or higher.
Yeah.
From an earlier cohort, and those are going to be larger cohorts. So they're going to have a large pool of potential male mates. But the men are going to be looking for a mate their age or lower.
Yeah.
From a smaller cohort. So they're going to have a much more limited pool of potential mates than the females do. So what that does is it produces a relative, a demographically contracting population produces a relative shortage of females and a surplus of males. And as we know, that condition of a shortage of females and a surplus of males leads to violence, conflict, instability.
Yeah.
Now, the silver lining there is all of those things will tend to lead actually to a turnaround and a return to population growth. Because the more violent and chaotic and dangerous things are, women being more risk averse, they don't want to deal with it. They'll want to stay home.
Yeah.
They'll be more willing to settle down and have children and accept a life of domesticity and leave, dealing with the dangerous outside world to men.
Yeah. 100%.
So it's kind of the economics of the situation are kind of produce a self-correcting tendency in a way. So we'll just have to see if that ever materializes.
Don't know. I mean, one usually say a healthy society has more females than males, because how baby making works is like when you feel more secure, you have girls. I don't remember how it is, but the point is, if you're a more healthy society, you have more girls. Per automation. How weird human DNA is. And the issue is, in Sweden now, we have more males than females because of mass immigration. That should say something to the ruling elite, that you're kind of failing society when you're breaking that rule. We're no longer a healthy society here.
Well, we already talked about how the leftists have, more inertia. They have more infrastructure.
Yep.
But, one reassuring thing is that their goals are fundamentally senseless and unachievable.
Yes.
So they can throw themselves against those objectives, and they can throw, our societies against the objectives as much as they want, and they can do a lot of damage doing it. They can't actually achieve those objectives. Those, in propertarian terms, they're not existentially possible objectives to achieve.
Yeah, 100%. They're so destructive in nature that they will destroy themselves.
Right.
I mean, I need to create that fucking video. I usually say when it comes to postmodernism, it will not be an opposition that beats it. No, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That is not a thing with postmodernism. What's going to happen is, because it's so destructive in nature itself, it's gonna bounce back to the normality by itself, or what I would define as metamodernism, because what they want is so destructive in natural law. It doesn't work. It's just such a negativity. It's a cost destructive.
You're already seeing that in some ways.
Yes, exactly. We will see that more and more. So the end of postmodernism, again, would not be in opposition. It would be the destruction of itself.
You're already seeing postmodern progressives, for example, calling for segregation in the guise of safe
Yeah.
spaces. You're seeing them, renormalize gender roles in some ways.
Yeah. So yeah, once we break through the postmodern, I think we're gonna go back to that. No,
Our challenge is really to survive.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So I usually say, have babies now. Have babies, have babies, have babies. Because you gotta survive this fucking timeline. Again, it will be, we will have another golden age. I do believe we will have another golden age. But it's gonna cost a lot to get to that golden age. And we have to survive that cost. So yeah, have babies and don't fuck up. Chill. Actually, I will just say chill for the moment because there is no solution in and of itself for postmodernism. There is no answer to it because it's a deconstructive philosophy, meaning that there is no answer ever to it. If you think you can, if you think you can add God into it, well, you can deconstruct God. Now you have I don't know what the fuck you have. Just let it deconstruct itself and destroy itself, and then be the new philosophy afterwards.
That's why I like critical rationalism. A big part of why I like critical rationalism as an epistemology is because it's largely immune to that deconstruction. Because I'm not making truth claims. I'm challenging you to deconstruct my hypotheses. Right? And if you do that dishonestly, I can point out how you're being dishonest.
Yeah.
But I'm not making a positive truth claim. So what do you have to attack?
Yeah. God, oh gosh. Yeah, true. If they can't attack it or deconstruct it, then... Or if they deconstruct it in and of itself, it's just, then you can't attack it. Anyways, we'll soon talk for 2 hours. We can talk forever. It seems to be quite nice. We should stop rounding it up.
Okay. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on before we...
wanted to ask you, so what's your current projects? What are you working on today?
Well, my current projects are more personal than political in nature or philosophical. So I just moved back to North Carolina pretty recently. I'm trying to get reestablished here, starting school, doing some online classes and work, and that's taking up most of my time. But as far as like my political and intellectual projects, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out a way to, make something that's durable in the medium to long term, like that can survive all this nonsense that's going on.
Yeah.
Because there's not a whole lot we can do to turn it around in the short term.
Exactly, as I said, exactly.
It's just going to do what it's going to do.
Yep, it's going to destroy itself.
And
we have to build upon the destruction afterwards, but it has to destroy itself.
Yeah.
And it's going to be fucking costly as all hell. Don't take me wrong. It's not going to be a fucking fun ride.
I'd like to see a better right-wing party in America. That's one thing I would really like to see. The Republican Party is not the answer, obviously.
No.
I think, their foray into populism is overall a positive thing in that it's less bad, it's less destructive than the Democratic Party. And if it can be successful against the Democratic Party, that's a positive thing. But I'd like to see a principled right-wing party to oppose them from the right. And even if it only gets a few % of the vote,
that's still enough.
It's enough to keep them from taking that right-wing vote for granted.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Because if they don't have that pressure, their incentive is to swing as far left as possible to try to scoop up as many votes from the Democrats.
Yes. Precisely.
And we don't want that.
That's the correct approach. Oop. That's definitely right. Because there is nothing on the right for them to go, so they go left. I mean,
Right.
many socialists in America, they complain about the opposite. They complain that the Democrats go too much on the right. The same thing there. There's nothing on the left. So there are two vacuums here, because the Social Democratic Party of fucking America is a big load of shit. So there's nothing on the edges, so they go towards each other instead. Which ain't good. Because your two opposition parties should be opposition parties and not moving towards each other. That ain't good, ever.
I'd like to see
because then it doesn't matter who you vote. It's the same shit regardless.
Right. I'd like to see the Democrats become the lunatic leftist fringe. And I think Trump has done a good job of boxing them into that. And I think it's something he does deliberately, because he's always equating them to, the AOCs and the Ilhan Omars.
Yeah,
And of course, they always take the bait and they defend those people. But at the same time, they're strengthening that conflation.
Yeah.
And so they're helping to box themselves into that label.
Yeah.
That's what the whole party is about.
Yeah, they're very stupid at that.
Still, it's relatively a small wing of the party in numerical terms.
But they're very loud.
Very loud. But it's becoming more and more like the exemplar. Those are the poster children for the whole party.
Yep.
And they're going right along with it. So they've been the ruling party in the U.S. since 1932. Even when they're out, they're still the ruling power. They still control the bureaucracies. They still control the institutions. They're still setting the agenda. It never goes back the other way. It might slow down going in their direction, but it never goes back the other way. The Republicans have never succeeded in turning it around, in part because they're not a very effective opposition party. They're really, they're in over their depth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as bad as Trump is and as disappointing as he is in so many ways, he's like the first one who's ever had any clue about what he's up against.
Oh, he knows. Again, but he's also a bit weak. Pardon.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. But, I mean, so I'd like to see that role be handed off from the Democrats to the Republicans. Let the Republicans be the ruling party for a while. They can be kind of a centrist populist party, and then have a real right-wing party for the opposition. And the Democrats can be out in left-wing loony land.
Well, I doubt it. Sadly, because how America is built up.
That's true. What we
need a new Theodore Roosevelt. A strong man to come in and just say, hey, let's break things up. Let's create the new bull... What the hell did he call the party? He called it the Progressive Party, but it was more the Bull...
The Bull Moose Party.
The Bull Moose Party, exactly. That's what's needed. A third party that can actually win. Or be influential, I should say. Now, but the issue with the Bull Moose Party is then Woodrow Wilson wins. And that's not good. We don't want another Woodrow Wilson. He's a fucking idiot. He's one of the worst presidents in America. So,
absolutely.
Fucking
Federal Reserve, World War I.
Fucking shit.
League of Nations. He was a mass immigration guy too.
He was a fucking horrible president. End of story.
Horrible in every way.
Horrible in every way. One of the worst.
The only good thing I can say about him is he was pretty racist.
All right. Well, we've been 2 hours now. Thanks for the call. I want to ask some questions without me recording. I want to finish it off here.
Sure.
So goodbye, Eli. Nice for having you. I'll put your little Twitter. Do you have a Twitter account?
I don't at the moment. No. You can put my YouTube.
I'll put your
That's a
YouTube
good
on
one.
the comments down below, or whatever it's called, description down below. All right. Well, say goodbye, Eli, to the people.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. It's been nice chatting.
It's nice chatting.